You've been told your whole life that you feel too much, that you take things too personally, that you need to toughen up, that you're too emotional, too intense, too affected by things that other people seem to brush off without a second thought. You've heard it so many times from parents, teachers, partners, colleagues, that somewhere along the way you stopped arguing with it. You started to wonder if they were right, if the way you experience the world really is a defect, a design flaw, something to be managed, minimized, quietly hidden. You've spent years trying to be less reactive, less affected, less yourself, and you are exhausted from the effort. So here is what I want to say to you before anything else in this video. You were never too much. The world was just too small for what you carry. The depth they didn't know what to do with. That's the most valuable thing you have. It is one of the rarest, most extraordinary, most profoundly human capacities that exists. And by the end of this video, you will never hear the words, "You're too sensitive," the same way again. Let's start with the science, because this isn't poetic reassurance, this is biology. In the 1990s, psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron identified and began formally studying a trait she called the highly sensitive person, or HSP. What she found was not a disorder, not a dysfunction, not a pathology. It was a personality trait. Highly sensitive people have a nervous system that processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average, more thoroughly, more completely. Where most people receive information and process it to a functional depth, the highly sensitive person processes it further, noticing subtleties, making connections, registering emotional undercurrents, absorbing environmental details that most people screen out entirely. This is not anxiety, it is not weakness, it is not a trauma response. Though trauma can intensify it, it is a fundamentally different way of interfacing with the world. Dr. Aron's research identified what she called DOES, depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional reactivity, and empathy, and sensitivity to subtleties. Each of these is not a problem to be fixed. Each is a feature of a brain that is doing more with the same raw information than most brains do. You are differently calibrated, and that calibration comes with real costs and with gifts that most people will never have access to. Let's be honest about the cost first, because dismissing it would be dishonest. Living as a highly sensitive person in a world that was not designed for high sensitivity is genuinely hard. You walk into a room and feel the emotional temperature before anyone has said a word. You pick up on the tension between two people that no one else has acknowledged. You notice the slight shift in someone's voice that tells you something is wrong, even when they insist everything is fine. You absorb criticism more deeply. You recover from conflict more slowly. You feel the weight of other people's pain as if it were your own, sometimes more acutely than the person experiencing it. You need more time to decompress after social interaction, more recovery time after difficult experiences, more quiet, more space, more solitude than the world tends to find reasonable or accommodate. And because the world doesn't understand this, because the dominant cultural message is that more resilience, more output, more social engagement is always better, you may have spent years receiving the message that your needs are unreasonable, that you should need less recovery, feel less impact, be affected by less. You've been compared unfavorably and repeatedly to people who process the world at a shallower depth and told that their shallowness is strength. That comparison was never fair. You are not failing to be resilient. You are processing more than most people ever will. The depth that makes you feel everything so intensely is the same depth that gives you capacities they simply don't have. Here is where the reframe begins, and this is not a consolation prize. This is the truth. The sensitivity that exhausts you is inseparable from the perception that makes you extraordinary. You notice things other people miss, not occasionally, constantly. You read a room before you've spoken to anyone in it. You sense when a relationship is shifting before it has visibly shifted. You detect the gap between what someone is saying and what they are actually feeling, with an accuracy that others find almost uncanny. You feel the emotional weight of art, music, and beauty at a depth that moves you in ways that feel almost unbearable. A piece of music doesn't just sound good to you, it reaches something. A film doesn't just entertain, it stays with you for days. You think in connections. You see patterns across seemingly unrelated things. You process experience with a thoroughness that produces insight. Genuine, original, hard-won insight that people who process more shallowly simply cannot access. Neuroscience supports this. Research using brain imaging on highly sensitive individuals shows significantly greater activation in areas associated with awareness, empathy, and integration of information compared to non-HSPs processing the same stimuli. Your brain is doing more work, not because it's malfunctioning, because it's extraordinarily capable. Dr. Aaron's research found that HSPs are disproportionately represented among artists, therapists, teachers, leaders, and innovators. People whose work requires exactly what high sensitivity provides: deep perception, empathic attunement, pattern recognition, and the ability to feel the human experience fully enough to reflect it back to others in ways that create meaning. The world's most beautiful art was made by people who felt too much. The most profound acts of compassion were performed by people who couldn't stop feeling others' pain. The most important insights, in psychology, in philosophy, in literature, in every field that asks what it means to be human, came from people who processed the world at exactly the depth you process it. Your sensitivity is not incidental to your gifts. It is the source of them. Understanding this intellectually is one thing, but most highly sensitive people carry something heavier: years of having their depth misread as difficulty. So let's talk about how that happens. You didn't arrive in the world believing your sensitivity was a problem. That belief was constructed over time, slowly, quietly, through accumulated experiences of being misunderstood. Caregivers who were less sensitive themselves sometimes experienced your depth of feeling as confusing or overwhelming, not out of cruelty, but simply because they didn't have a framework for it. They had no map for a child who processed everything this deeply. Schools designed for average sensory thresholds couldn't always accommodate a nervous system like yours, where overstimulation looked like difficulty and emotional responses looked like disruption when they were simply signs of a mind doing more. A culture that prizes output over processing, speed over depth, composure over feeling, gave you very little permission to be exactly what you are. Carl Jung wrote that the first half of life is often spent conforming to what the environment rewards and quietly setting aside what it doesn't. For highly sensitive people, what gets quietly set aside is often the very core of who they are. The sensitivity doesn't disappear, it turns inward. It becomes the quiet exhaustion of performing a more compressed version of yourself, one that takes half your energy just to maintain. But here is what matters. None of that was a verdict on your worth. It was simply a mismatch between your wiring and environments that didn't know what to do with you. A mismatch is not a defect. Put a fish in a tree and call it broken for not climbing, or recognize that you've simply misunderstood what kind of creature you're dealing with. Let's go deeper into the biology, because the more you understand your own nervous system, the more the old stories dissolve. Research has found that highly sensitive people show significantly greater activation in regions of the brain associated with awareness, empathy, and action planning when processing emotional stimuli, compared to non-HSPs viewing identical content. In particular, the insula, a brain region associated with self-awareness and the capacity to feel others' emotions as if they were your own, shows markedly higher activity in HSPs. This is the neurological basis of empathy, of attunement, of the capacity to genuinely understand another person's inner experience. This is not emotional vulnerability. This is a highly developed social and perceptual capacity. Studies also show that systems in the brain responsible for modeling other people's mental and emotional states, for understanding, predicting, and feeling alongside others, are also more active and more finely calibrated and highly sensitive individuals. You don't just intellectually understand what someone is feeling, you feel it with them, in your body, in your nervous system, at a depth they may not even have access to themselves. This is why you are the person people call when something is genuinely wrong, why you notice when someone is struggling before they've said a word, why your presence in someone's pain feels like the most meaningful kind of company. Not because you try harder, because you are wired for it. Understanding what you are is the beginning. Here is how you actually live well inside it. First, stop treating overstimulation as failure. When you need to leave the party early, when the emotional complexity of a crowded room becomes genuinely overwhelming, that is not weakness. That is your nervous system reaching its processing capacity. It needs what every high-performance system needs: recovery time. Honor it without apology. Second, curate your environment deliberately. Highly sensitive people are profoundly affected by their surroundings, by noise, by clutter, by the emotional atmosphere of the spaces they inhabit. Your nervous system processes environmental input at a depth that makes your surroundings genuinely consequential to your well-being. Curating them isn't optional, it's strategic. Stop apologizing for your emotional responses. Your grief is not disproportionate. Your joy is not excessive. Your empathy is not embarrassing. The depth of your emotional responses is proportional to the depth of your processing. You are not overreacting. You are reacting fully. These are not the same thing. The next thing you should do is find your people. Highly sensitive people often spend years feeling fundamentally alien. Too much for most relationships, too deep for most conversations. The relief of finding people who match your depth, who don't experience your emotional range as a burden, who find your perception interesting rather than exhausting, is one of the most important things you can do. You are not looking for everyone to understand you. You are looking for the few who will, and they exist. And lastly, channel the sensitivity. Don't suppress it. The sensitivity that overwhelms you in one context becomes extraordinary in another. The same nervous system that makes a crowded, noisy, emotionally charged environment difficult makes you remarkable in one-on-one connection, in creative work, in any field that requires genuine attunement to human experience. Don't try to feel less. Find the contexts where feeling this much is exactly what's needed. You are a person who feels what others ignore, not because you are fragile, but because you are paying attention at a level most people never reach, because your nervous system was built to receive the full signal, not the filtered, abbreviated, emotionally compressed version that passes for normal. The pain that other people don't notice, you notice it. In strangers, in rooms, in the spaces between words in a conversation. You carry it because you cannot not carry it. Because your wiring makes invisibility impossible. That is a burden. It is also, in the deepest sense, a form of witness. In a world that moves too fast, that values productivity over presence, that mistakes numbness for strength and depth for dysfunction, people like you are the ones who slow down enough to actually feel what is happening, to register what is real, to notice what everyone else has learned to screen out. You are the ones who write the books that make people feel less alone, who hold the space in which grief that had no room finally finds somewhere to land, who see the person in the corner that everyone else overlooked, who feel the beauty in things that most people walk past without a second glance. You are not here to feel less. You are here to feel accurately. In a world that has largely lost the capacity to do that, that has mistaken disconnection for resilience and speed for wisdom, your sensitivity is not a disadvantage. It is a form of intelligence, and the world desperately needs it. The next time someone tells you that you're too sensitive, and they will, people who process the world at a shallower depth are sometimes uncomfortable around those who don't. Your depth holds up a mirror they haven't chosen to look into. Your feeling names things they have quietly learned not to feel. Your presence raises the emotional temperature in ways that can feel inconvenient to people invested in keeping it low. When they say you're too much, you can understand it now for what it is, not a verdict on your value, a description of the distance between your depth and where they are. You were not built for their comfort. You were built for something else entirely. You were built to feel the things that need feeling, to notice the things that need noticing, to carry the emotional truth of human experience at a depth that most people, through no fault of their own, have learned to avoid. That is not easy. It has never been easy. And anyone who told you it should be easier was simply comparing you to a different kind of person entirely. But here is what is also true. The life available to you, on the other side of accepting rather than fighting what you are, is richer than most people will ever experience. The connections deeper, the beauty more vivid, the meaning more present, the experience of being alive more fully, more completely, more honestly yours. You don't have to feel less to live well. You have to stop fighting the depth and start living from it. You were never too sensitive. You were just surrounded by people who had forgotten how to feel. And the world needs you to remember, for all of them.